Washington Journal continues.
California Republican Tom McClintock joins us now in the wake of Speaker John Boehner's bombshell resignation announcement on Friday and ahead of a House Republican conference meeting this afternoon to discuss how to move forward. Congressman McClintock, what's the mood of the conference heading into that meeting?
You know, actually, I think there's a sense of relief. There had been an enormous tension that had been building up for reasons that are both fair and unfair. I think John Boehner realized he'd become a lightning rod for a lot of the frustrations, not only of House Republicans, but also of Republican voters. By removing himself from the equation, I think he's given the conference an ability to take a fresh start. I think it's going to improve the morale of the conference, but it's not going to change the underlying political dynamics that are responsible for that frustration. So it's going to be very interesting to see how it unfolds in the next few weeks.
Who leads today's meeting of the conference?
Well, the conference meetings are always led by the conference chairman, who is Kathy McMorris Rogers.
And what are your questions going to be at this meeting today? What are you going to be looking for from answers from leadership?
Well, there needs to be, I think, a reorientation of the relationship between the rank and file members and the leadership. We delegate to the leadership certain day-to-day decisions, but ultimately the conference is responsible for these decisions. The leadership works for the conference and not the other way around. I think one of the reasons for the internal friction is that, well, let's be honest, John Boehner was not a very good listener, and I think viewed his role more as the director of the conference rather than as its servant.
Who do you think will be a good listener? Who do you want to see as the next speaker?
Well, I think Kevin McCarthy clearly has mastered the long-lost art of listening. He is just an amazing guy when it comes to being able to touch base with every member of the conference, know where they are, know how far they're willing to go, and I think that's what has made him so effective over the years in finding that consensus point with which to move forward.
So maybe the more contentious question then is, who do you see as the next majority leader to take over for Kevin McCarthy?
That is a very, very tough question. We have some very, very capable, qualified people seeking that office, and I really don't want to take sides on that one. Both Tom Price and Steve Scalise are absolutely superb people. I've had a policy over the years that I've learned the hard way, that when you've got two friends in the race, try to stay out of it. So, but we'll see how that develops too. I'm hoping Calvin Coolidge's maxim applies in this case when he said, when you see 10 problems coming down the road at you, 9 are likely to run off into a ditch before they reach you. I'm hoping that's one of the 9.
We're talking with Congressman Tom McClintock, Republican of California. We're asking our viewers to join in this morning. Democrats can join at 202-748-8000. Republicans, 202-748-8001. Independents, 202-748-8002. Tom McClintock, a member of the Budget Committee. Of course, we're facing a government shutdown, perhaps tomorrow at midnight if this budget situation isn't worked out. How do you see the next 2 days playing out on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think first we have to reflect on how the last 6 months have played out. The House has applied itself, has produced 6 of the 12 appropriations bills, sent them over to the Senate, and despite Mitch McConnell's efforts to bring those up, Harry Reid and the Democrats have blocked it on that 60-vote rule of holding it hostage on their demands that we bust the spending caps and spend a great deal of money that we don't have. Well, that's what's gotten us into this mess. You know, how do we get out of it at this point now that we're at the 11th hour and none of the appropriations work has been done? I think the only way forward at this point is a short-term continuing resolution. But, and this is a very, very important caveat, it must be accompanied by a timetable announced by the joint leadership of the Congress of how we will move forward to produce those appropriations bills. They have to establish a timetable that we're willing to stick to. A continuing resolution is not only the lazy man's way to funding the government, it continues all of the mistakes of the past. And as you know, the spending trajectory that we are on is completely unsustainable. We spent $230 billion last year just to pay interest on the national debt. That means for an average family, about $2,000 of the taxes you sent to the IRS this year accomplished nothing more than to rent the money that we've already spent. The Congressional Budget Office warns that within the next 8 years, our interest costs will actually exceed our entire defense budget. That's why I think Mike Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, 4 years ago warned that in his professional military judgment, the greatest national security threat to our country is the national debt. That's why. So it's so important that we move forward, bend that spending trajectory. Congress has adopted a budget that does change that trajectory, that does put us back on a path to solvency. Having set that course, it is absolutely essential that we stay that course, and the appropriations process is the only way to do so. A continuing resolution takes us down the same path to ruin that we've been on.
Many of the members of your conference believed that this fight over Planned Parenthood funding was worth a potential shutdown fight on Capitol Hill. What was your view on that?
Well, I have opposed the funding of abortions my entire life. I've held office now for 29 years. I've been very consistent in taking that position. However, the tactics that have been suggested to link the budget to Planned Parenthood as the conditio sine qua non of funding the government, I think, is highly counterproductive. It alienates the public at just the time when these barbaric videos of Planned Parenthood's activities are changing public opinion. And it deflects the blame from Harry Reid and the Democrats in the Senate, who have been consistently blocking any spending bill unless they can get their demand to blow the lids off of our spending limits.
You mentioned tactics. Tactics, one of the reasons why you decided to leave the Freedom Caucus. Explain that decision.
Well, that was the reason for the decision. Their tactics had become entirely counterproductive to the conservative cause. Time after time after time, they had actually not only failed to advance that cause, but have actively impeded it. It was their decision to block the House taking up the resolution of disapproval on the disastrous nuclear Iran treaty or agreement that blocked the House from actually having a vote on that, which would have been a decisive repudiation of that agreement. I think their hearts are in the right place. I think their tactics are absolutely counterproductive to everything that conservatives are trying to accomplish in this government.
And what do you think after Speaker Boehner resigning, the Freedom Caucus will do tactics-wise when it comes to the next speaker? How much pressure, how much influence are they going to have?
Well, I think that's going to depend a lot on the next several conference discussions that we have on this subject. You know, the vote that an individual casts in the Congress is a matter of conscience, of judgment, and of their responsibility to their constituency. That is their right, and nobody should question it. You might question their judgment from time to time, but not their right to make the decision on the votes they cast. However, when it comes to the organization of the House, who are the leaders of the House? What is the agenda of the House? What are the rules of the House? That is the prerogative of the majority party. That has to be decided by the majority party conference, and every member of that conference has to respect that decision. The problem is we have a group that are not respecting that decision. And if time after time threatened or actually combined with Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats to thwart Republican policy, and they do so as the Freedom Caucus, which I find very ironic, and that's becoming a very serious problem.
Did you try to voice those concerns before resigning?
For 8 long months, I pointed out that that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats do not get to vote in the Republican conference. You move these questions over the organization of the House, which are the prerogative of the majority party, out onto the House floor. Well, then 188 Democrats get to vote on that, and I have warned these conservatives time and time again that those 188 Democrats are far more likely to combine with the 29 most liberal members of our House, not the 29 most conservative, and the conservatives are not going to like the outcome. Okay. But I was getting nowhere with them, so I decided the best thing to do was to resign.
Congressman Tom McClintock is our guest. Let's get to our calls. Andre's up first, waiting in Weatherford, Texas. Line for Independence. Andre, good morning.
Yeah, good morning to you. Thank you for taking my call. My question to the congressman is, how you have so much believe in Kevin McCarthy so much when he was the whip? How many votes did y'all pull from the floor because he couldn't count? I'll hang up and take my answer off the line.
Well, I don't think it's a question you could count. I think people told him they were voting one way and then voted another. And with all of my high hopes and expectations for Kevin McCarthy, I cannot reasonably expect him to be able to read minds. Why I support him is because, first of all, I think he is on his own very conservative. He's not known as a movement conservative, but don't forget, he has been very outspoken in wanting to end this era of crony capitalism that is personified by the Export-Import Bank. He has been pressing Mitch McConnell to change the 60-vote threshold to take up bills in the Senate. He's been very bold on a number of these issues, and I think will continue to be a speaker. But far more importantly, he has the ability to communicate with a very diverse spectrum of members in the House Republican Conference, identify a consensus point and move forward. I think that's going to be a very important improvement on the leadership of the House.
And you know Kevin McCarthy dating back to his time and your time in the California state legislature.
Exactly right.
And talk about him as a young state legislator.
Well, he was a phenomenon then as he is here. He's just, the two things that strike me as most remarkable, I've discussed one already, his ability to interact with people, to know where they are, and to find a middle ground that will move us forward. Organizationally, I've never known anybody who has been able to do as much as he can in the limited time that we're given on this earth. He is very much driven in that respect and is making enormous sacrifices, because I know he's also a family man and is spending quite a bit of time away from his family in order to change the direction of this country. I admire that enormously, and I think as I said, I think he's going to be a big improvement as House Speaker.
And if he does become House Speaker, he'll be one of the farthest and fastest rising members of Congress through leadership in, according to the Washington Post, well over 100 years. Mm-hmm. We're talking with Congressman Tom McClintock this morning. John's up next. Nazareth, Pennsylvania, line for Republicans. John, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for taking my call. I just like to know, where is the future of the United States? The people of the United States are getting tired of the same thing over and over again. We have new leadership now we're getting a new House Republican, and I feel we need change. We need somebody in there to get things done, because nothing gets done. As a Republican, I think we should try to work together to put money in the people's pocket, and we need things done now and not later. Because if we get Mr. Trump in there, are you going to work with Mr. Trump because he wants to put money back in people's pocket? That's the name of the game. We want to get the United States. We want to bring things back into the United States. We want to bring jobs. We want to bring leadership. We need somebody in there to get things done. And as a Republican, what are you going to do to help the people put money back in their pockets? And again, as a Republican, I hope we could do this, and I know it seems to me nothing's going to get done. It's going to be a new person in there, and nothing's going to get done over and over again.
Well, if you're expecting an overnight miracle, you're going to be disappointed. And by the way, you are not alone. I mean, I get an earful every week from my constituency over the fact that we voted all these changes and nothing's happened. What's wrong with you people? And you know, my response might not be satisfying, but it's the truth. Our government was not designed to turn on the outcome of a single election. In fact, it was specifically designed not to turn on the result of a single election. It takes a series of elections to change the direction of this government. We are now well underway in those elections. We have another coming up next year that I think is going to make an enormous difference in changing the direction of this country. So it's all right to be frustrated. It's all right to be angry. In fact, you should be. But don't you dare get discouraged. This ship of state is turning. It's turning agonizingly slowly right now, but it is turning.
We've heard from callers saying that Kevin McCarthy doesn't represent too big of a turn. Speaker Boehner's right-hand man becomes the next speaker.
Well, don't forget, the majority leader is elected quite independently of the speaker. The speaker doesn't appoint the majority leader. The majority leader is elected by the Republican conference and serves the Republican conference. Now, obviously, being the number 2 position in the House. He is closely identified with Boehner, but his position
And Boehner
is quite,
endorsed him on Friday in his news conference.
well, I think you're going to see a broad cross-section of the conference endorse him, conservatives like me as well as more moderate folks like Boehner. But the overall, and again, I think that's a testament to Kevin's consensus-building abilities. But I think conservatives are going to be are going to find him an improvement over the current leadership. But again, they shouldn't be expecting miracles. That comes after a series of elections. Like I said, we're well underway of that. But until there is a new president, we're not going to be able to make the changes in law that are necessary to restore the founding principles of this country. What we have done is to completely shut down the Obama legislative agenda. That's why he's resorted to issuing executive orders, many of them illegal. I think the courts will strike down some of them, and I think that the next president in about 480 days is going to have a very busy inaugural afternoon rescinding the rest.
Not that you're counting down those days. Serge is up next. Germantown, Maryland, line for Democrats. Serge, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I wanted to ask the congressman, as a Republican, I've been trying to understand Republican logic here. We know that for a fact that Israel does state sponsors of abortions. Will the Republican be voting to stop aid to Israel as they are to trying to stop aid to Planned Parenthood?
Well,
Thank you.
Frankly, I don't know Israel's position on public funding of abortions, which is the issue here, and that's really irrelevant to the question of peace in the Middle East. I don't think there's any question that Iran is our only reliable ally in that troubled region. The survival of Israel is absolutely essential to the security of the United States because it's absolutely essential to the ultimate civility being restored to that region, or civilization being restored to that region. So I think our support of Israel is very important and shouldn't hinge on policy differences between our countries on domestic issues.
Richfield, Wisconsin's up next. Martin's waiting, line for independence. Martin, you're on with Congressman Tom McClintock.
Yes, good morning, C-SPAN. Good morning, Representative. My question really has to do with the functioning of Congress. You've mentioned, as we all know, that now that the Republicans have had control of both houses for a short period of time, and you've mentioned specifically how Democrats have been able to block votes. When the Democrats had control of both houses, were the Republicans also able to do that?
They did in the Senate, but not to the same extent. My problem with the Senate is a procedural question. That 60-vote threshold is a perversion of a very reasonable parliament and fundamental parliamentary principle, which is it should take 2/3 to close debate. If 1/3 of the deliberative body wants to continue a debate, it ought to continue. But that assumes two things. It's an actual debate when people are actually on the floor speaking to one another, and it assumes that that debate is germane to the immediately pending question. This parliamentary rule has been perverted over the years to now be just a 60-vote procedural hurdle to take up legislation in the Senate. That is a serious problem, and it needs to be addressed by the Senate.
Tamara, Daly City, California. Line for Republicans is up next. Tamara, good morning.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm calling to speak in opposition to Tom McClintock and in opposition to Kevin McCarthy as the new speaker. Mr. McClintock represents everything that's being swept away in the Republican Party, big capital, big money. The times are changing in the Republican Party. We need a genuinely conservative speaker, and we need to follow through on what the Republicans promised. We need replacement of the Obamacare. We need tax reform, and we need immigration enforcement. Mr. McClintock is old school, and times are changing.
Tamara, who would be your pick for the next speaker if you had a choice?
You know, I don't know the House well enough to select someone, but it has to be someone who does represent the interests of the Tea Party.
Well, Tamara, I think I can now die a happy man, realizing that my leadership in the conservative movement over 30 years is now considered to be mainstream establishment. If we've made that much progress in those years, I'm very, very happy about that. I think you completely misinterpret my position and Kevin McCarthy's position on that whole issue of crony capitalism that you just raised. As I pointed out, the Export-Import Bank is probably the poster child for crony capitalism. That's when the government takes your money, uses it to underwrite loans for foreign companies so that they can buy products and then compete against American companies. Kevin McCarthy has been an outspoken critic of the Export-Import Bank and has been advocating that it not be renewed. I join him in that, and I think that the Republican Party is now taking very strong stands against the kind of crony capitalism that has creeped into our free market system.
The Washington Post noting some of the movement behind the scenes in the race for the next House Speaker and Majority Leader. Two potential rivals to Kevin McCarthy took themselves out of the running. Both Financial Services Committee Chairman Jeb Hensarling, a prominent conservative who has clashed with Boehner, and Congressman Pete Roscoe, formerly Chief Deputy Whip, who has taken a leading role in calling for party harmony, announced that they would not seek the Speaker's post. The flurry of passes leaves only Congressman Daniel Webster, a long-shot contender who made an unsuccessful run for Speaker earlier in the year, openly challenging McCarthy. And they note there are signs that conservatives see a better opportunity to shape the contest to replace McCarthy as Majority Leader should he win the Speaker's gavel. Your thoughts on a Daniel Webster bid?
I think he needs to demonstrate more leadership in the House. I know he has a very good record in the Florida legislature, but I want to see folks that have actually proven themselves in this forum, which is very different than state legislatures, and I say that having spent 22 years in the California state legislature.
Tommy's up next, calling in from Louisiana. Line for Democrats. Tommy, good morning.
Good morning to y'all. Mr. McClintock, did I hear you say you've been in the government for 30 years up there?
29.
29?
In the state legislature and Congress combined.
Oh, okay. I think you're part of the problem. I think you identify yourself wrong when you depend on government for your living. You are a socialist, and that goes for you, Democrats, and everyone else who's been up there their entire life.
Tommy,
you are the problem.
Well,
I'll let the congressman respond, but before it does, how long is too long? What do you think should be the maximum amount, Tommy?
2 terms.
2 terms. Congressman McClintock.
Well, I used to support term limits. We tried that in the state legislature in California. In fact, I would win all of my debates by saying, take a look at the legislature today. Could it possibly get any worse with term limits? My penitence for taking that stand was to watch the state legislature in California degenerate very rapidly after term limits was adopted. What we saw was that the respect for the institution evaporated. There was a huge power shift from the legislative branch, which is supposed to represent the people, to the executive branch, and the long-term concern over the impact of policies was eliminated. It used to be in the unterm limited state legislature, people would be very concerned about, well, these policies might play well now, but what are they going to do in 10 years? Because they expected still to be there. That ended with the term limits, and it did not bring about the kind of changes that we had hoped to see.
Charles is up next in Arthurdale, West Virginia. Line for Republicans. Charles, go ahead.
Thank you for taking my call. The first thing I want to say is, in 2000, when Bush took over, that's when we got our debt. We went to war, and that's the only thing that the Republicans wanted to do was go to war. The second thing is, you got a Speaker of the House, you should have 2 of them. Democrats and Republicans. If the Republicans don't want to bring anything up, then let the Democrats or the independents. Whenever you take away my rights to have somebody bring something up, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, up to the floor to vote, you're taking away my rights to be represented in the Congress. The third thing is, the Congress and everybody passed a bill that the students, college students, have the right to vote at 18 years old. Now, this seems to be cutting out all the elderly people. You go to all these colleges and universities and stuff, and sure, you're going to get a vote because look at how much money that the bill that the student loans owe right now, over $1 trillion. And the third thing is, you know, whenever you took the right to the draft, you took a right to have somebody tell our kids that, you know, respect and honor and service to the country. Now, this is the way that everybody stays in the Congress and stuff, because they don't have to go to the old people. You are cutting out the old people, and everything nowadays is you got to have an education.
Well, Charles, a lot there. I want to let Congressman Tom McClintock respond.
Well, first, with respect to George Bush's handling of spending, those who know me know I have nothing nice to say about that. He ran up unconscionable debt. He was the most fiscally irresponsible president on record until the current occupant, whose conduct makes the Bush years look like the good old days. I've often said my beef with Barack Obama is not that he changed George Bush's policies. It's that he did not change them. He took the worst of them, doubled down on them. And now we have a national debt that exceeds $18 trillion, that has doubled in the last decade. And as I said, is now producing interest costs that are eating our country alive. You know, with respect to the 18-year-old vote, you know, as you know, that was adopted in the 1970s. It is, I think, the established law of the United States, and I don't think anybody is seriously suggesting modifying it, nor does anybody seriously suggest that somehow 18-year-olds voting diminishes the right of senior citizens to vote.
Judy's watching us in Hawaii this morning on our line for independence. Judy, good morning.
Good morning. I just wanted to say I'm glad to see that Boehner is retiring. And I wanted to say I don't know about McCarthy because he doesn't seem strong enough. I think we need somebody real strong to come in. I think Jeff Sessions might be the better choice. But I also wanted to ask your guest why he thinks that Congress is just not, and the Senate just aren't functioning properly. I mean, we feel like we're not being represented at all in this country. We feel like the government is completely broken, and the Supreme Court is now legislating. And I mean, how could all of these congressmen, and now that the Republicans have the power, why aren't they doing anything with that power? Why do they let Obama get away with all he's getting away with?
Well, as you know, there are constraints that our constitutional system places on each of the branches, but there are also checks and balances that are built into that system that are supposed to be able to restrain the kind of unconstitutional conduct we're seeing out of this president. And there's nobody more frustrated about that than the Republican members of the House. But you know, there are basically 4 checks that the House has on the unconstitutional actions of a chief executive. We have, of course, the power of impeachment, but history warns us, can only be invoked when there is an overwhelming public consensus that currently doesn't exist. We have the power of the purse, and we've been exercising that power to a limited extent, but there are practical limitations on what we can do, as we discovered 2 years ago during the government shutdown in 2013. The Republicans passed 3 separate bills to fund the entire government, with the exception of Obamacare, over to the Senate. The Senate simply ignored them, and when the government shut down, it was Republicans who were blamed. So there's a practical limitation on that we discovered in 2013. We have the ability to bring the courts into the process, that third branch. And we've done so now on Obamacare, and I suspect we're going to be expanding upon that in future days. Fourth, we have the ability to investigate, to lay out the facts before the American people. I think we're doing that very aggressively on a range of fronts, most notably on the Benghazi scandal. But I think you're going to see a series of investigations now over Planned Parenthood's behavior after the release of these just horrifying videos. The House is taking those actions very seriously. I think the Congress now is taking those actions very seriously, but there are limitations to it. Ultimately, the defense of our Constitution rests with the American people, and that's why I've never been more optimistic about the long-term future of our country than I am right now. It's because of folks like you who are angry, who are upset, and who are engaging in the process. Just remember, all the debates that go on in Washington are merely a reflection of the much broader debate that's going on among the American people. That's the debate that goes on over backyard fences and family dinner tables and coffee at Starbucks. It's on the outcome of that debate that our country's future is being decided, and it's on the outcome of that debate that our Constitution ultimately can be redeemed. And I see very strong signs that that process is well underway.
You mentioned the Congress's ability to hold investigations. The Oversight and Government Reform Committee today at 10 o'clock is holding a hearing on Planned Parenthood with the president of Planned Parenthood. That's happening at 10 a.m. Viewers can watch that on C-SPAN 3. You also mentioned this frustration that's out there among the American people. Donald Trump, one of the candidates that's riding that wave of frustration. Yesterday at Trump Towers, he introduced his tax plan as part of his presidential campaign. I want to show our viewers a little bit from that.
We're going to cut the individual rates from 7 brackets to 4. Simplification. 25%, 20%, 10%, and 0. If you're single and earn less than $25,000 per year, or married and jointly earn less than $50,000. So, very important. If you're single and earn less than $25,000, or married and jointly earn less than $50,000, you'll not pay any income tax, nothing. This eliminates very strongly and quickly the marriage penalty, very unfair penalty. It eliminates the AMT, which is the alternative minimum tax. It ends the death tax. It's a double taxation. A lot of families go through hell over the death tax. It reduces or eliminates most of the deductions and loopholes available to special interests and to the very rich. In other words, it's going to cost me a fortune.
Congressman McClintock, at one point in your career, you served as the director of the Center for the California Taxpayer. Your assessment of that plan?
Be a huge improvement over what we've got now. I think all of the Republican candidates are moving toward some form of a flatter rate tax system. That's what the congressional budget now calls for, is flattening the tax rates, reducing the overall rate, and eliminating as many of these loopholes and deductions and carry forwards and credits that are distorting the normal market decisions that Americans make. Those countries that have moved to a flat rate system have been rewarded with explosive economic growth, and I think that he's on the right track.
Carl's up next, Porterville, California. Line for Independence. Carl, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I just have a comment about Kevin McCarthy. He is our representative in this area, but realistically, we've never seen him. I get a flyer once a year from him, and that's it. Now, the problem here is that this area is very, very poor, high unemployment, and a lot of Hispanic voters. And I don't think anything Kevin McCarthy does represents the people of his area. If the Hispanics would ever get together and vote, he would no longer be our representative.
Carl,
if
he does become Speaker, do you think you'll see more of him, or that it'll be better for your district?
No, I don't think there'll be any change at all, because realistically, I voted Republican since 1972, and now I've changed because of Kevin McCarthy. basically he doesn't represent any of the values of his district.
Well, I think that's demonstrably false, and the evidence I would put forward is the fact he's been overwhelmingly reelected by the people of his district. I think that's the definitive question of whether he, or the definitive answer to the question, does he represent his district? He does well, and the district has spoken out very, very forcefully on that issue, election after election.
Kazun Go is up next here in Washington, D.C., line for Democrats. Go ahead.
My name is Kazungo. And I was just wondering, why can't the Representative Tom McClintock, why can't he also from California? Why can he not also seek to lead as Speaker of the House?
You want the congressman to be the next speaker?
Yes, I want him to be the next speaker.
Congressman, your thoughts?
I appreciate that, but I've got my hands full where I am. Thank you, though.
Jeff is in Crofton, Nebraska, line for Republicans. Jeff, good morning.
Hey, thanks, C-SPAN. The representative, I agree wholeheartedly with you. I mean, the Republicans were put in a really, really tough place when they had Harry Reid, who would not pass anything in the Senate. I mean, he wouldn't even do it for his own Democrats. And then they had a president who would veto or go around Congress every chance he got. And then you had the Justice Department that was absolutely crooked as a dog's hind leg and still is. And we're trying now, as Republicans, to try to pull things out. So I have all confidence, especially if we can get a good conservative Republican in office as president, that this country is going to be absolutely fine. I do not want it to be Donald Trump. I would prefer Ben Carson, Farino, or the other representative from Florida, because I do want a flat tax. I agree. I want 16 to 18% flat tax. I want to get rid of IRS. I want everything to go to the state levels that can go to the state levels, and get rid of them out of our government. They are nothing but a absolute farce. They're
okay, Congressman.
Well, and I think that we're moving in that direction. There's been a profound change across the country, and you hear it in the frustration and anger of a lot of the callers. They want change. They're not seeing it. I think that's a very healthy thing. And it is propelling events that will produce those changes. We've seen them now in the Congress with the largest Republican majorities in either house since 1928. But without a president who is willing to sign legislation to repeal Obamacare, without a president who is willing to live within the constraints of the American Constitution, the Congress can fight a rearguard action. We can block his legislative initiatives, and we have. We can investigate the unfolding scandals, and we have. We can attempt to use the power of the purse, at least to somewhat constrain these illegal activities, and we have. And we can invoke the courts and bring them into the mix, and we have. But as far as the broad changes that have got to be made to restore the prosperity of this country, that's going to require a Republican president, and I think we're well on the way to getting one.
Who should that president be?
Oh, well, I endorsed Scott Walker when he was at 20 points. And the moment I endorsed him, he dropped like a rock. So I'm trying not to make that mistake again. I may pick out the one I like the least and endorse them and see if I can get them out of the race. But the good news is we have, I think, a very strong field. And the fact of the matter is, nobody in his right mind wants Barack Obama's third term. And that's all the Democrats are offering. So as long as the Republicans don't make the mistake of offering the other thing nobody in his right mind wants, and that's George W. Bush's third term. As long as we avoid that pratfall, I think there's going to be a Republican president, and I think that he is going to embrace the kind of policies that Ronald Reagan brought to the White House, which restored the prosperity and the strength of our country.
Flemington, New Jersey's up next. David is on our line for Democrats. David, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you, Congressman and moderator, for taking my call. I believe there's something really offensive and undemocratic about what I'm perceiving as the Republican Party's subtext involving Donald Trump. It's almost like a bunch of grown-ups regarding a young person with ideas that don't go along with the establishment as not being legitimate. And whether you think he's legitimate or not, I just don't think that's the way we're supposed to be as a country. You know, we're a country, we come up with challenging and new ideas, and people are given legitimacy. And I think they're just waiting for him to go away. And I'm personally offended.
Well, frankly, my hat's off to Donald Trump. I think that he has raised issues that the other candidates were unwilling to raise, particularly on the question of illegal immigration. We've been told for years, oh, that's the third rail, don't you dare touch it. Donald Trump proved that was very bad political analysis, that this is an important issue to Americans, and that the message that he's bringing is resonating. My only concern about Donald Trump is there are times when I kind of wince at some of the things he says. He seems to occasionally run afoul of Oliver Wendell Holmes' advice when he said, when you argue with your emotions, you never fail to delight your supporters, infuriate your adversaries, and alienate that vast middle ground you seek to persuade. If I were advising Trump, I would advise him to keep that advice in mind. But I think he's made a very positive contribution to the campaign, and my hat's off to him.
In our last 30 seconds or so, Node Scans on Twitter has a question. What were Boehner's greatest accomplishments and failures as a speaker? How would you grade him?
Boy, that's a good question, and I think it's going to take some more time for history to get a proper perspective on that. I think that he will be remembered as doing the best that he could under very difficult circumstances to resist a dramatic turn to the left that this administration attempted to take the country. I think he'll be remembered for producing the largest Republican majorities in the House in nearly 100 years. I think his greatest failings were an inability to communicate with the American people and an unwillingness to listen to rank-and-file members.
Congressman Tom McClintock, Republican of California, appreciate your time on the Washington Journal.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, John.
Up next, Democratic Congressman